Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a US-EU politics update, considering there's been a big deal between the two entities today. I originally had this on the end of my Geopolitics video, but actually it made it too long, so I've cut this off to be a separate video, giving my initial thoughts on this deal. So it will start a bit oddly, I would have thought, in just a second. Right, I said yesterday we're going to be talking about the UK's relationship with the EU quite a lot because, you know, it's still really important, and it's super important today. Why? Because there's been a meeting between the EU and the UK to do a deal. Right, this is a kind of post-Brexit reset, as they keep calling it. And the deal has been done today with sort of last-minute shenanigans involving fishing rights. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit. So, for the same reason we had, or the same kind of mechanism took place when we did a deal with the US, that farmers recognized that they were the ones that had to take it for the team in order to get a deal through with the US. And they kind of recognized that. We realized that we were the compromise. Well, the compromise for the EU to slash red tape on particularly agricultural products was EU fishing rights in British waters. Right, which has long been a massive bone of contention. So the fishermen are taking one for the team in the same way that farmers took one for the team for the US bill, US trade deal, that actually isn't a deal. It was a kind of, we will do a deal. It is not legally binding, so that's important to note. I think this will be legally binding though, this one. And that's going to get people like Nigel Farage up in arms because he used fishing as one of the major arguments for Brexit in the first place. He was on the Fisheries Committee or whatever it is in the EU, and funnily enough, I have reported this before, he had the worst attendance record for that. So he used to shout about fishing, but as a member of the European Parliament did nothing to advance the cause of UK fishermen, and that was his job in the European Union as his role as a member of the European Parliament. Absolutely incredible. Nigel Farage is all mouth. He's all fart and no poo, that man. He does not do anything substantive. He had the worst attendance record and the worst voting record bar one in the EU. Horrendous. But there you go. That's Nigel Farage for you. Now, an agreement has been reached to slash red tape on food products in exchange for extended EU access to fishing waters. A deal clinched between the UK and EU to remove checks on agri-foods will add $9 billion, the UK government claim, to the UK economy and lower food prices. Number 10 has said, as a last-minute agreement was clinched early on Monday morning, the deal, which will grant EU fishers access to British waters for an additional 12 years, will remove checks on a significant number of food products, as well as a deeper defence partnership and agreements on carbon taxes. Now, I don't know the finer details. I'm wondering if actually the fishing access is just an extension of what already exists for another 12 years. So it's not like giving extra things to the EU, and then we get in return for that the checks on significant number of food products, so that will allow stuff to go frictionless trade across the channel into Europe, right? And that's super important. That's really been hurting us a lot. But here's one that's important for our kind of Ukraine war topic: deeper defence partnership and agreements on carbon taxes. So the defence partnership, that might allow us then to sell, because we had just heard that the EU has now sorted out the $150 billion provision for defence spending, with, I think, scope for borrowing more. And they were saying in order for the UK to get closer, to be able to access that funding for BAE systems and whatnot, to be able to do that, we need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, it looks like that could be what we've achieved with this deal. So that could be really, really important for our military industrial complex in the UK. The UK said the deal would make food cheaper, slash red tape, open up access to the EU market, but the trade-off of the deal was fishing access and rights for an additional 12 years, more than the UK had offered, which is likely to lead to cries of betrayal from the industry, and you are going to hear this. Officials have hit back at the criticism, arguing that the food standards deal will have a huge benefit for fish and seafood exports. So part of the problem for our fishing industry was actually getting our fish into Europe. So I'm sure this will be good news economically. The two sides will also begin talks for a youth experience scheme, first reported in The Guardian, that would allow young people to work and travel freely in Europe again and mirror existing schemes the UK has with Austria and New Zealand, among other countries. It will be capped and time limited, etc., etc. Right. So the reaction to this. So here we have Richard Tice, Reform, typically saying that this is terrible.
This is a day when I think the Prime Minister is surrendering some of the hard-won Brexit freedoms.
What's that? So that is higher prices.
Hang on, he's ignoring...
Hang on. The inability to go through the gates and higher prices, and young people can't go to Europe. Those are the victories, are they, Mr. Tice?
Which is interesting, because Nick Ferrari for LBC here is pretty much a Brexiteer. So he's doing a good job of pushing back on Richard Tice here by saying, well, what are the freedoms that we're giving up? So what? Expensive food, no freedom of movement of people, or freedom of movement of young people, and so on and so forth. Richard Tice then has to come back to this.
No, let's be clear. The voters 2 weeks ago said that when they voted for reform in huge numbers, that was a clear message. We don't want mass immigration. And yet he's opening the borders to what's essentially freedom of movement through the back door of the nice-sounding youth mobility scheme. You just heard from Kamal Ahmed about our inability to control our borders. We're giving up control of the ability to set our own rules and regulations. Instead of having what you call mutual recognition, which is the grown-up sort of trading international standard we should have, we're just going to become complete rule takers under dynamic alignment. And then we're surrendering control and access to our fishing waters once again. So this is a triple surrender, and the Prime Minister will pay for this in the polls.
But the point is, see, the people like Reform will say, if we do a deal, I think they see deals like a football match, which is that you can win, lose or draw, but you can have, I think he imagines that you can actually have a deal where we go into negotiations with Europe, with the EU, and come out with a 6-0 victory. We won that 6-0, we stuffed Europe. That's impossible. You have a score draw, basically, is what's going to be your almost certain outcome, which is both of you come away with having scored a few goals, like a 3-3 draw. We get that, you get that. That's how you do a deal. So because it will always involve compromise, you will always have critics like Richard Tice who will say, you've given away that. Yeah, but we've gained this. Yeah, but I don't care about that. You've given away that. And he focuses on what is given away. Now, that means, as far as I'm concerned, that Richard Tice should advocate for no deal with the EU. He should advocate for us having our closest neighbours and our biggest trade partners. We should have the barriers to continue to be up to do trade with them. That's what he should be shouting about. That he should be advocating for not doing any deal, because if you're going to do a deal, you will compromise. So I'm fed up of people like Richard Tice saying stuff like this. But anyway, so next a report says, for the first time since Brexit, a joint EU-UK summit is taking place in London. At the core, security, global challenges and the future of their relationship. We have a real chance to write a new chapter, said Ursula von der Leyen. And I think that's absolutely correct. And I think this is what should have happened. Now let's listen to Rachel Reeves, our Chancellor. Of course, this is going to be very pro the deal, of course, because she's the one at the heart of it.
Our biggest trading partners are our friends, our allies in the European Union, and for too long it's been too difficult to export, to bring in talent, to trade with our nearest neighbours, and that's not good enough because it's held back our growth, it's held back our exports, and it's held back opportunities to Britain. And at a time when we're also facing war on the continent with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it's also imperative that we work together with our friends and allies to keep Europe safe.
do not underestimate the importance of that stuff. I mean, that she mentioned that kind of right at the top end of this. Yeah, it's about doing more trade, but also it's about defence. This is super important, and I'm really happy that this is being headlined.
And the deal today is about doing all of those things. It's about bringing more good jobs to our country. It's about reducing prices in the shops for consumers as your costs fall as businesses. And crucially, it's about our defence partnership with our allies. We're going to have more to say about that today. Shortly after this breakfast, I'm going to be heading down the road to Lancaster House with the Prime Minister and others. That summit will take place. There'll be some announcements hopefully around lunchtime, but be in no doubt, today is a really important day for Britain, ensuring that we have good trading relationships with allies all around the world. First India, then the US, and today with the European Union, our closest neighbours. I also want to say a huge thank you to all of you. Getting to this point has not been easy, but the voice of business, the voice of employers in Britain has been really crucial in helping to set the scene and create some positive momentum in the last few weeks. So thank you for your support. We're doing this for jobs in Britain. We're doing this to support businesses in Britain.
This is really important as well, because there have been supermarkets have been crying out for this. You know, lots of people want this. Now, it's also worth noting this is not joining the single market, the customs union. This is nibbling around the edges. This is not as big as many people might think it is. It's just about taking these baby steps towards a proper trading relationship with the EU.
And I honestly believe that working in partnership, government and business, whether it's on planning, whether it's on regulation, whether it's on capital markets reform, or whether it's on trade policy, the best decisions are made when government and business work in partnership. And I hope that this is just another example of the approach that this Labour government is taking to policy making. So look forward to continuing to work with you.
Okay, so that's what she had to say. Now, there were sort of pro-EU groups and economists saying that actually this could raise £25 billion as an annual boost to British exports. So that's one analysis, although the government said 9 billion. The Independent ran with a 25 billion a year boost to the economy with Starmer's Brexit reset. So, yeah, I don't know. Both of them will be sort of projecting a lot. And yeah, I was going to go. Let's listen to. This is Reynolds, Jonathan Reynolds, who's our sort of business secretary.
The crucial thing those communities need and that industry needs is market access to sell the product. So for food, generally the EU is a major market for us, our major export market. But for fish and shellfish, it's overwhelmingly the case.
Yes.
I mean, 70% of the stuff caught in UK waters by the UK's own industry is sold to the European Union. Our exports, 70%. So by losing some of that market access, that is as big a issue as to who's got the right to catch it in the first place. So actually, we would be seeking to improve their situation by sorting out this agreement on food standards and export trade.
And actually, you did have these viral videos after Brexit of people complaining, fishermen who voted for Brexit, then realised they'd bitten off their nose to spite their face, because actually it was looking, like Brexit was going to hurt them, and they voted for Brexit. Then you've got Lord Rose, a Conservative peer and businessman, having a go at people in the Conservative Party who have been attacking this deal, saying actually it's kind of pathetic that you're calling this a surrender.
A lot of people will have looked themselves in the mirror since 2016 and thought to themselves, hello, what did I do? It has to be a win. I mean, as Bruno was saying just now, listen, nothing is straightforward, but the most important thing is you have to understand is it's 10 years or 9 years since we voted to come out of Europe. It's 5 years since we did the deal in 2020. But in reality, look what has happened in the world since then. There's been massive global change. And the UK is finding itself increasingly stranded now, and we've got to find a role for ourselves. And then we've been ignoring the 250 million people across the channel, 20 miles away, who are the power base in this part of the world, and we should be attached to them.
500 million people, by the way. You've halved the size of the EU there. Everything I've been saying, that we are minnows now outside of the EU, and trying to do trade deals as a minnow with other nations, let alone with the EU, is very difficult.
shouldn't be talking about surrender, and we shouldn't be talking about what we're giving up. We should be talking about an opportunity.
Yes.
The argument here, Stuart, is if we align with the EU on food standards, we sacrifice sovereignty. That's the argument. What do you say?
I don't quite understand the word sovereignty, because we are all interconnected in this world, and anything that you do where you take something from somebody else, you could construe as being giving up sovereignty. It's nonsense. The reality is that we all need each other, and we've seen that so markedly with what's happened in the last year or so with the war in the Ukraine, with what's happening now, the terrible things in Gaza, with what's happening now. We've got Trumpism in the States. We can no longer rely on our old partners. We are a small country with the 5th largest economy in the world, which is large, but we're going to the 6th. We've lost trade in the last 10 years. We need to re-establish those ties. And why would you not re-establish it with people with whom you have an affinity?
I guess the question is, because some things, people who voted for Brexit would say to you, Stuart, so some things are more important than economics. They're about national pride and a national sense of self, not being an island of strangers, in the phrase of...
That is true. That is true, Stig. Sorry to interrupt you, but that is true. But in reality, 5 years is a long time. 9 years is a long time. And people's attitudes change. I've always regarded the British public as having the most common sense of any nation state in the world. We are practical, pragmatic people. And I saw some reports, and this is only me quoting what I read, I may be wrong, saying that there's a lot of now evidence on polls that people are much more pragmatic themselves about what they voted for 5 or 7 years ago, and they've changed their attitudes. We all change. Listen, we change our government every 5 years potentially, so why can't we change our minds about Brexit every 10 years?
This is not a surrender.
Totally what I think.
It's nonsense. It's nonsense. I really am quite disappointed and sad that I live in a country. I am a conservative, although I am not a politically active conservative. I'm not a politician. But to hear that the Conservatives are saying this is potentially, we must be rule givers and not rule takers. It's about giving a bit, taking a bit, and understanding this is a very difficult, unpleasant world we live in, and we've got to make sure that for the UK public and for the UK, we do our best. That's what we elect our politicians to do. That's what I expect them to do. And talking about small things like surrender is pathetic.
That is 100% what I believe.
Vote today, it would go a different direction.
Listen, I don't know, but I don't know is the answer. But I suspect a lot of people will have looked themselves in the mirror since 2016 and thought to themselves, hello, what did I do?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I totally agree with that stance. And here we have Sir Simon Fraser with a calm, measured take, as mentioned here.
How tough is it to thread a needle to do deals like this with different partners at different times?
Well, it's always difficult to do big trade negotiations. And as you say, there's a lot of politics behind this. Let's step back. I think this is a really important moment. I think we are moving away from a sort of destructive antagonism with our closest neighbours in Europe, just as we're trying to manage the relationship with the United States. Europe is faced with an aggressive Russia on one hand and an uncertain America on the other hand. And Britain is part of the European continent. And so the politics of doing a deal like this at the moment and coming through some of the negativity around Brexit, I think is really important. And we don't know yet the full details of it, but it feels to me like a significant step forward. Well, I don't think this is the end of the story. I think actually it's more the beginning of the story, and there's a lot.
And here's the kind of key takeaway from what you're saying, that this isn't some big thing. This is a stepping stone. It's nibbling around the edges, smoothing the edges. But actually, this is the beginning of the story of a reintegration, economic reintegration of UK into the EU, or with the EU.
Potentially to come, events would unfold over time, and we don't yet know exactly what's in this deal and what's left still to be agreed. But there are big areas of cooperation with Europe that are important, for example, in trade, but in energy trading, and further movement on cooperation on defence, research and security. All of those are very significant things. So this, I hope, is a significant step, but I would say it's not the end of the story. And hopefully it will help us to create a more permissive attitude on both sides. So we get away from this sort of relentless focus on the negative towards helping us find things where there's mutual interest to build a mature and stable relationship coming out of Brexit.
And that's what I'm saying. Concentrate on the positives, not always the negatives, Richard Tice. But of course, his opposition needs reform.
And that doesn't mean I'm not saying we need to rejoin the European Union. Let's be clear about that. But let's try and have a proper, balanced and productive relationship with Europe.
100%. And then I just want to... is it worth popping into this? Deal will reduce cost, paperwork, red tape, looking at measures to use EU queues at airports. Fish industry has red tape when exporting to the EU market. Will not return to freedom of movement. We have 13 youth mobility schemes, and we're going to reduce net migration. So that's what the government is saying there. And then actually, this is the last, I think, major snippet I want to play to you. Fairly sort of similar to what we've heard the last two. But I think this is well said as well.
Priority for this government is growth. They're really, really keen to get the economy growing. Will this have an impact on that?
It'll have a tiny impact on that, I think it's fair to say. So the stuff they're talking about, which is sort of recognition of professional qualifications, a deal on agriculture, defence investment, they will have some impact. But the fact of the matter is that the really key things when it comes to growth are the customs union and the single market, which are, of course, the two things that this government ruled out in opposition and continues to rule out in government.
Yeah, so pro-Europe.
So actually, no, I remember now. It is slightly different to those other 2 points, which is, it's about smoothing around the edges there. It will have some effect, but actually the key, is aligned with what we're saying, which is, okay, then what are the next steps? So this is your stepping stone towards the really big thing, which would be joining the single market, joining the customs union.
Europeans will say, well, this is simply tinkering around the edges.
Well, I think it probably is just tinkering around the edges in the sense that when it comes to the economic relationship, if we put defence and security to one side, what we're doing is sort of smoothing away some of the rough edges that have been put in place by the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. What we're absolutely not thinking of doing at the moment, at least, is renegotiating that trade treaty that Boris Johnson signed back in 2020.
So what you're saying is that if it helps with the red tape, then that's a good thing, because it's something... I'm thinking of supermarkets, for example. They would love less red tape, wouldn't they?
Yeah, supermarkets are very much in favour of a deal on agriculture. They're very much in favour, it's worth saying, on a long-term deal. There have been all sorts of rumours that the EU wants to time limit this deal. I think British businesses wouldn't like that because there's more uncertainty in the air. Also, we should bear in mind that a deal on agriculture will make it much easier to deal with the hassles that have arisen over the Great Britain-Northern Ireland border because of the Northern Ireland Protocol. If you can limit the number of checks that are required on agricultural products, it will have a huge impact there as well.
Priority.
And he's making a reference to, he's a Leeds supporter. Leeds. He's making a reference there to the Northern Ireland border, which is really important because Northern Ireland is on the island of Ireland, and that is an EU border. And there used to be frictionless trade and all sorts of people going either side of the border willy-nilly for, just reasons of work. You'd be working in a farm just a mile that way, and when we were in the EU, you could just from Ireland to Northern Ireland, you could easily go between the two, and there's frictionless trade. And now we have a border with the EU there, and yet Northern Ireland, there's a sea between. So then Boris Johnson tried to sort out this thing where we'd have to put a trade barrier, like a customs line in the sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the British Isles, and that would allow Northern Ireland to keep trading with the Republic of Ireland. But then, and it's all a mess. Like, leaving the EU is really challenging for a bunch of very pragmatic reasons. And so, these are the sorts of things that are going to be improved somewhat with this kind of deal. But of course, it's not going to be for everyone. You are going to have Richard Tice from Reform shouting, Nigel Farage shouting. You are going to have the Daily Express saying PM is hell-bent on selling out our Brexit freedoms, without really talking about what those Brexit freedoms are. They had a Brexit, 3 years to negotiate it and 5 years to deliver it, and raised net migration to 1 million, cut GDP by 4%, and tied businesses up with red tape. So, quit your whinging. Is the answer to that. But then, Daily Mail and the Express are going to go to town on this. PM risks Brexit vote betrayal. PM is hell-bent on selling out our Brexit freedoms. Brexit? What Brexit? On eve of surrender summit, Starmer eyes a deal to cozy up to Brussels with hundreds of millions of UK taxpayers' cash, is how they sold that, along with slagging off Meghan Markle again. No doubt. Yes, they call it the surrender summit even before it's happened. They are being negative about a deal. Well, you don't want a deal. Like I said about Richard Tice, you don't want to deal with Europe then. You want things to be more expensive? Fair enough. Go for it, the Daily Mail. But you advocate on the front page of the Daily Mail that you want prices at the supermarkets to be higher for consumers. Go and do that. Fair enough. You're welcome to that. Betray Britain at your peril. And there you go. It's just really irritating. Back Brexit betrayal headlines in the Daily Mail and Express over a very small series of tweaks in the grand scheme of things. And that's it. Very small tweaking, smoothing at the edges, as was mentioned. This is setting the tone for weeks and months to come. Pity there wasn't more ambition on Labour's part, given the inevitable negative headlines, says Edwin Hayward, which is like they should have gone for something bigger, given that this is actually a really small agreement, and the newspapers are going to town on it. But there you go. Anyway, that's enough from me. There's just a little set of views on the deal that has been done. More detail will be forthcoming, I'm sure. We don't have an awful lot to go with at the moment, but I think it's almost certainly going to be good news. And it will be a stepping stone towards hopefully a closer union, economic union. We don't have to be talking about freedom of movement of people, just a closer economic union with the EU. We need growth in our economy, and this is the number one way to get it.